The process of investigation and reflection underlying this work was painstaking. It began in 2004 with a trip around the ghettos of Los Angeles, and where I found an official report which stated that over 10,000 young people had suffered violent death on the streets of the city in a 20-year period. I focused my attention on the violence caused by the young gangs, and particularly on the murky relationship that is established between the role of the victim and the killer. After reflecting on this, I realized that this perverse and fluid interchange between the roles was possible because both inhabit an undefined area which some writers have called social death or death in life. When living with others in deprived areas under extremely precarious conditions, one starts to see the correlation that exists between this so-called social death or death in life and the subsequent violent, anonymous, and invisible death. The social death or death in life that I saw in LA made me understand that despite the different settings, this was not dissimilar to what young people experience in the deprived areas of Colombian cities and in deprived areas of cities all over the world as well. In this piece, Plegaria Muda, which could be roughly translated as silent prayer, I tried to articulate different experiences and images that form part of the violent nature of the Colombian conflict. I also wanted to bring together a series of violent events that determine the unstoppable spiral of mimetic and fratricidal violence that marks out internal conflicts and civil wars all over the world. Plegaria Muda seeks to confront us with repressed and phantom grief, and with violent death when it is reduced to its total insignificance, and form part of a silenced reality as a strategy of war. It is also a response to a particular event that took place in Colombia between 2003 and 2009, in which approximately 2,500 young people from deprived areas were murdered by the Colombian army for no apparent reason. It was clear, however, that the Colombian government had implemented a system of incentive and rewards for the army if they could prove that a greater number of guerrillas had been killed in combat. Faced with this system of rewards and incentive, the army began to hire young people from remote and deprived areas, offering them work and transporting them to other places where they were then murdered and presented as unidentified guerrillas discharged in combat. For months, I accompanied a group of mothers who were both searching for the disappeared sons and trying to identify them in the graves where they were abandoned by the murderers. Later, I joined them in the painful and arduous process of living out their mourning and engaging in the vain attempt to achieve justice in the face of the barbarism committed by the state. The death of each young person generates an absence, and each absence demands that we take responsibility for the absent ones, since the only way they can exist is within us in the process of living out our grief. Derrida says that surviving is another name for mourning. He says that to survive and to mourn are synonymous. In his essay on the process of mourning, he writes, "We will never reach the ones," quote, "we will never reach the ones who died. What we must recognize when referring to the death of a human being is that they will only remain in us or within us as long as we keep their memory alive," unquote. To mourn is to recognize that the person who has died lives within us. Some people depart before others. That is the law of life and of mourning. It is up to us the survivors, to find a way to express our grief. It can be done in many different ways, through words as a condolence, or in a work of art like Plegaria Muda. This piece is an attempt to live out this grief, a space demarcated by the radical limit imposed by death, space that is outside of life, a place apart that reminds us of our death. Plegaria Muda is a huge piece, but it is not a monumental piece. I think it is important to reflect on the difference which exists between monument and memorial. James Young has analyzed this difference in his book, The Texture of Memory. I will quote him without quotation marks. Memorials remind us of tragic events and death. Their function is to provide places where mourning might take place, whereas monuments play a commemorative role, close to celebration. It turns victories, heroic acts, into something memorable. Arthur Danto wrote, quote, "We erect monuments because we must remember, and we create memorials because we should never forget," unquote. Monuments commemorate the memorable, while the memorials ritualize the act of remembering our dead, and simultaneously it emphasizes the fragility of our own lives. Monuments construct heroes, conquests, triumphs, victories as an integral part of life. It is a way of honoring ourselves. The memorial is different. It is a place outside life. It is a place apart in which to rethink the past on the basis of the urgency imposed by the present. Instead of inspiring memory, the monument freezes it into a commemoration. It is what an elite wishes to impose in order to maintain the status quo. But since memory is not fixed, a fixed monument forgets that culture is mutable. And for that reason, time winds up mocking monuments. In this sense, the function of monuments, it is to become an obstacle to the reinterpretation of history. The memorial is something entirely different. It's not a remnant of the past. It is not a document. It is not a relic either. It is the link which joins past and present to the future. The memorial enables a society to rethink difficult moments of its past, which might impact its present and redefine its future. I hope that Plegaria Muda might define a space that makes it possible to remember all those human beings who had been abandoned in common graves. I chose the image of the grave because for people who inhabit zones where violent conflicts take place, it is an image that represents both a traumatic experience and a commonplace scene. Despite being a terrible image, we look at it with certain indifference. The dead ones are anonymous and their mournings are non-existent. Colombia is the country of the unburied dead, the mass grave, and the anonymous dead. For this reason, it is important to highlight each tomb individually in order to articulate an aesthetic strategy that allowed us to recognize the value of each lost life. Despite not being marked with a name, each piece is sealed and has an individual character, as if to indicate that a funeral has taken place. Maybe a precarious one, but a funeral has taken place. The implacable and obsessive repetition of the tomb emphasizes the painful repetition of this unnecessary death. I believe that the repetition also emphasizes the traumatic nature of this death, which are considered to be irrelevant by the majority of the population. By individualizing traumatic experience through repetition, I hope that this work can, to some degree, evoke each death and restore its true dimension to it, thus allowing those profane lives to be returned to the sphere of the human. I hope that in spite of everything, life might prevail, even in difficult conditions, as it does in Plegaria Muda. Thank you.